Welcome to the Women in Leadership Body, Mind, Soul, and Business podcast. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Heather. Together, we are working to connect women in leadership and business to build relationships and empower each other, improving the health and wellness of our community, body, mind, and soul, sharing the heart and soul of who we are and what we do.
Today's guest is a woman of power and grace. She helps businesses by supporting their people and is on the board. She's the board president for the North Alabama Women's Economic Development Council in Huntsville. Please welcome back Samantha Brinkley of Rocket City HR Consulting. Thank you again, Samantha, for joining us at our table.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here again to see you.
Yes. So for those listeners who this might be their first podcast and have not met you yet, take a couple minutes and introduce yourself, please.
So I am the business owner of Rocket City HR Consulting, and it is an organization that I started in 2011. It started out as just a way to give part-time HR support to companies that were maybe too small to have a full-time HR department. They had several employees, they have a need for HR services, but they maybe don't need a full-time person providing them. So we've grown from that, and that is a service we still provide, but we also provide support to companies that are large enough to have an HR department, and also companies that are on the even larger size that maybe need help with strategic HR. So we kind of do everything from cradle to grave on the employee side, and really for the business owner side, it can be helping that business that's a startup to they're just hiring their first employee, to they already have some employees, to okay, now we have employees and we need a compensation plan or a succession plan. So we really kind of do the full business cycle as well, everything related to HR with those.
I love that. I just had a question that just came up. So have you ever had an experience where you had a company outgrow you and need to hire their own HR personnel?
Yes, we have had that happen many times. In fact, that is a sign that we've been successful in what we've done. We've had several clients that have, I have one that I still work with now, actually, but we helped them hire their first HR person. So we were part of that process. We were able to help them find the person that would be the right fit for them, and then work with that person to make sure that they knew everything that the organization was doing and how to do it. And now we still work with them on a consultative basis if they have a question or something that's sticky or that they just need additional guidance on. And sometimes it might just be something that they just don't really have a bandwidth. It might be a recruitment. Right now, we're looking into a Department of Labor question that we're working on with them. So, we always try to stay in touch and stay connected to our clients, because you never know that HR manager may come and go, and they may need us again to step in and fill in the gap and then help them find the replacement for their HR person.
That
Right.
sounds so scary. Like something happens and your HR person's just gone. Like,
Well, we've been doing a lot of that lately. Actually, we had one case where one of my staff members filled in for a person that was going on maternity leave, and so they needed basically a 30 to 40-hour a week person to do the recruiting for about a 90-day period. Well, that person has now left, and they now want somebody to kind of help with their recruiting temporarily, and then also help them document their processes. So as they bring their next person on, they'll be able to step in and already have things under control.
I think that's awesome. It's like really helping the business grow from point A to point Z.
Mhm.
all along
And
the way.
every step along the way. And business profitability and stuff, it tends to ebb and flow, right? We don't, normal businesses do not hit the ground running and make $1 million, right? You have to work to get there, and there's a lot of ebb and flow along the way. It's all part of the process. And I know along with that process, something near and dear to your heart that you would like to talk to us about today is pay equity and inclusion.
Yes. So the reason why I'm bringing that up right now is we have a lot of government contractors in the Huntsville area. And I know that doesn't pertain to everybody, but a lot of times when things happen, they start in the government sector, the government contractors have to comply, and then certain states will follow along. And it's really been that way a lot with a lot of HR laws. So the government contractors have certain requirements they have to do. They have to do an affirmative action plan to show that what their hiring numbers are. They're trying to show diversity in race and gender and age, veteran status, disability status. They're kind of looking for those things. And that is kind of slowly but surely, pushing its way out into even the private sector. So I lived in California, as you all are aware, for about 15 years. And they were a lot more heavy on the employment laws than Alabama has, definitely. But they were already kind of doing some of the things. And so in 2016, they kind of added on to the Equal Pay Act. And the Equal Pay Act has been around since 1963. So, I mean, it's always said that you need to pay your employees and it shouldn't be based on their gender. And so California has recently come on and with their latest
updates,
their compliance and their tweaks to the law and how they're going to react to it. They're basically saying, not only do we want pay equity amongst different genders to be consistent, but we also want to make sure that pay is equitable amongst people of different minorities. So they're really trying to spread it to not just be about gender, but also about race and pretty much every other area. So I feel like when we start talking about D, E, and I, so it used to always just be D and I or just inclusion. Started out with just, first I think maybe it was diversity, then we decided it's inclusion, and now we've got D, E, and I, and it's the equity, and it's like, how do we make things equitable? And so California's been trying to do that with writing into their Equal Pay Act, how we're going to look at a job and say, all right, if they're significantly similar in their effort, then they should be paid the same. And so maybe you have a female custodian and a male janitor, and for some reason they weren't being paid the same, but the work is really about the same level and about the same skill set. And so looking at some of those things and looking at the Department of Labor's statistics, I thought we had really come a long ways, but really we're still where women are making on average about 70 to 75% of what men do. And it varies depending on industry. And I do understand that there are sometimes where women come out of the workforce, they focus on their family, they do, but still when you look at their skill set and what they're able to do when they're working, I feel like that difference doesn't really make up for it. And you can even look at a woman that maybe never took time out of the workforce and she still lags. And so it's trying to figure out, what is going on there. So I really just thought that that's kind of an important topic, we want to kind of look at and explore and talk about, because, this impacts everybody. And if an organization isn't as inclusive as it can be, then they're going to miss out on some key things. They're going to miss out on engaged employees, productive employees, and they're going to miss out on their own profitability. And so these are the things that we've been talking about the Great Resignation, I think the last time, but we're seeing employees want to leave. And so we're going to have to figure out what are ways to get them to want to stay. How do we get them to feel like they're included? And this inclusion isn't just about gender. It's not just about race. We've got disabilities. We have their socioeconomic status. Even looking at the Supreme Court Justice, the current nomination that we're looking at, and President Biden said, okay, I want to pick, an African-American female. Even before he looked at all the candidates, he said that's what he was going to pick. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know. But
that was the best person for the job or not.
Yeah, I really think it should be the best person for the job. But then again, you have where you're looking at your pool of people that's supposed to be representative, and it's not. But if you look at the Supreme Court, so okay, they now have an African-American woman, they have an African-American man, they have a variety of Caucasians on there, but every single of the 8 justices, 4 went to Harvard and 4 went to Yale. So there's no other law school in the entire country that can produce a lawyer that's competent to sit on the Supreme Court. So it's just, there's just a lot of little ways that diversity, can be. It can be people from the South versus people from the North. I mean, just little biases and things. So inclusion isn't just about trying to look at the big demographic factors, but it's really looking at how do you take employees and make sure that they feel like they're welcome and they're a part of the organization, no matter what their age or their race or their gender or their sexual identity or any of those types of things. Is how can we look at them as a individual human being, and how can we best support them?
I love that.
Wow.
Wow.
That is beautifully said. I like it.
Yes.
I love the way you phrase that, your words with that. 'Cause I think I've always looked for places to work where there was that. I've worked in primarily like in nonprofit sector, mostly women staffed, so I personally haven't witnessed it, but I've seen it out, out in the workforce, you see it. And I hear a lot of, you know, bringing attention to the issue, but I don't think people really know what to do. Like, how do we make that? Like, and I like that you're showing us that there are things that are happening, at the higher level, and bringing awareness to the different types of inclusion. I think that's great.
Right. And it's going to have like that trickle down effect, right? It's got to start up here with the laws and things like that. And then it's going to take some time to trickle down into all the things and all the places, because, it takes a while to do this, but it shouldn't take, this law came into place back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't take an entire generation and a half to figure it out.
Well, I think what the point is that we didn't have the knowledge of how to implement it then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're still figuring that out. Like,
how to best go about it.
How do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that is inclusive, right? Because I think when we talk about women's rights, we really are talking about, we're standing up for the everyone that's underserved. We're not just talking about women in general. I mean, we're talking about Black women getting to vote. We're talking about, all of the things that go along with women standing up for what we believe in.
Right. And it's been, over the last 100 years, there's really been a lot of growth with women in the workforce, especially, and different things have pushed that. World War II was a big push with women back at work because they had to, because the men were gone to war.
Just like any other time men go to war, women do things, right?
Right.
But when the men came
now-
back home, we kind of, we almost went back to the way it was, right after that. So it really needs to not be temporary, and it really should just be based on, what do they want to do. And I just find it interesting that, that law was passed in 1963. And what I find hilarious, and this happens so many times, and we always have to kind of counsel on it. And we have employers that will come to us and they want us to put a policy in their handbook that says that employees are not allowed to talk about their pay, because employers don't want their employees discussing their pay because it's uncomfortable and all that. And that's where we kind of start talking about pay transparency. But the reality is, since 1963, they're not allowed to prohibit that. I mean, they're supposed to make sure pay is equal. And then you have the National Labor Relations Act, which basically kind of sets the foundation for employees if they decide to join a union or not. So they have a right to talk about anything related to their work environment, their work experiences. So they have a right to talk about that. So I will always have to tell them that you can basically tell them they can't talk about that at work, but you can't prevent them from talking about it outside of work hours or at home or on Facebook or on social media. You have to allow them to do that. And hopefully they will want to, protect the company. But at the same time, if they realize that they're not being paid fairly, and this is kind of how I think a lot of it was covered up, is that just the people didn't know what anybody else made. And then the companies would have these policies out there saying you're not allowed to talk about it. And then only, within the last, 15 or 20 years, are we saying, look, you're not allowed to tell employers you can't talk about it, because that is a part of their work situation. And they have a right to talk about that, their condition of work. And so trying to be transparent, you have companies on the other side that they make it completely clear. Here's the range and here's where people are within the range. And it's a little more uncomfortable as a business owner, because then you have to explain to so-and-so why they didn't get the highest pay and why so-and-so is making more than them if they bring it up. But that's the reality of what is legal to do, is that you have to be able to share that information.
Yeah.
Wow. So do you have, do you teach women at all how to open that conversation and having that conversation with each other? Because I don't know that we're comfortable talking to each other about our pay because we have been told.
Right. We're also not comfortable with asking for more.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. It's like we get this impression that we should just be happy with what we're offered, you know,
You have a job, you should be grateful for it.
and
Mhm.
that if you ask for more, you know, the big ask, right? You ask for more, you ask for a raise or whatever the case may be. And, you know, you might get reprimanded for that. You know, like that's the
I
fear.
haven't had positive experiences asking for more, like even trying to feel
But
out.
you're right. I mean, a
Is
man
it
will more
okay
than
to
likely
ask
say,
for
hey,
more?
I need a pay raise, and they will ask multiple times until they get it. And a woman, she'll probably go 2 or 3 times as long before she even thinks to ask for one. And then she finds out somebody else got one, and then she may ask. But really, it should be up to the employers to not wait for somebody to ask for
Right.
additional pay. And we see that all the time too. We see
Or they're
employers that they're
underpaid.
losing their best employee because they went somewhere else because they can make more money. Then they come in at the very end with the offer, well, we'll give you more, we'll match it. Well, you know, a lot of times it's too little too late, because why didn't you do that sooner? So we really recommend that employers are looking kind of regularly at what their pay is, what the market is, and it's changed within the last year. I still think it's crazy, but COVID has raised rates that people are making by 20 to 25%. And if you're still paying what you were paying at the beginning of COVID, you might be losing some people soon if you're not adjusting that. Because if they're looking out there and they see there's a labor shortage and they see they can make more money, if they're motivated by that, or if they're in the least bit unhappy at all, perfect time to just make that transition. So I feel like they need to be looking at pay and making sure that they are paying equitably. And that's where with the government contractors, the OFCCP will come in. Now, they've always been required, if they had more than 50 employees, to do an affirmative action plan to kind of show what their hiring and promotion stats are, and to show, you know, how diverse they are on some of the gender and ethnicity and disability and veteran status. They've always been able doing that, but now they're looking more closely at pay, and they're looking at, you know, can they say why this person that's in this particular job title, and you've got a female over here making this amount and somebody else making this amount, why are they not the same? You know, why is this person making less, or why are they making more?
Job at the same
Mhm.
tier, why are they not getting paid the same?
Right. And so they have to justify, they have to show it's based on difference of education or experience or training, or some special knowledge, but you know, they're having to be more accountable for it. And I feel like that's being more of a standard now, is that employers are kind of having to take a look. And so now, if you're a government contractor, at least once a year, you don't have to have an outside firm come in and do it, but it may be easier. But you have to take a look and look at your salary and your wage data for all of your employees and see where you are. And you know, the government can look at that, they can audit it, and they can basically fine you, or they can make you fix it. So I think it is a step in the right direction. Right now, it only applies to government contractors, but I feel like that is the kind of thing that,
It should be the
if
standard.
Yeah,
yeah,
it will.
if employers don't take care of it on their own, eventually, you know, you're going to have California and New York are going to probably be the first two to step in and say, you've got to look at it every year. And so, you know, if we want to make sure that people are happy and they're being paid fairly and equitably, then I feel like we should do it before the government has to tell us to do it, because we don't want the government in our business. But that's what's going to happen. I mean, you know, here we are 40 years after the Equal Pay Act, and you still have roughly 20% of executives and board members are women, and 20% are minorities. And so that's not our population. We have roughly 50% women, and minorities are now the majority. So how collectively are we not going up that ladder like we should be?
Right.
Right. So
I really liked what you said at the end, like an employer throwing the money part at you, and I think especially for women that the money is the last piece we consider. Like when we're making a choice, like it's how we're feeling at work. It's, how do we feel respected? Are we communicating well? Are we, is the chain of command working with us or against us? Are we able to flow? I mean, there's so many more factors for women, especially than that bottom line of the money. Because I think that unless it's really good money, women don't just stay there for the money. Like we're there.
I hear somebody snoring.
Yeah. We wore her out this with gardening. She gets tired.
That's pretty funny.
But showing up and like when we've made that decision, we're already done.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I like what you said, that it's too late. You're starting way too late in the process to hinder that. So thinking about it in advance.
Yeah. Or, oh, you want to quit because there's a problem? Well, let me fix the problem. And like, no, dude, I tried to fix the problem before and now it's not working. So we're done. I'm done.
Well,
I'm done
I think
dealing with it.
in general, women are problem solvers. Like we try to fix stuff. Like we understand chain of command. We understand the whole process of how things should work. And then we're also moms, so we're solution orientated. Like women in general are just very, and like that's what we do every day. Like it's just something's thrown a wrench in the middle of our plans. We just work around it, like So you have to catch it before it gets to the point where somebody wants to just leave. And the cost of hiring new staff, and training them repeatedly is so high. Like that is like a horrible cycle for you to be in, is to always have new staff.
Plus, there's something said about loyalty. When people are loyal to your company and your employees average have worked there 10, 15, 20 years, that is a sign of a good, successful company, is the longevity of its employees. But with our topic this week being practice and action, what are some things that we can do in order to put this practice into action?
All right, I'm going to refer to a chart. I'm going to look at it visually 1 second because it was looking at DE&I. There was a report that I was reading, and it was looking at the majority of businesses, kind of where they fell in that spectrum. And it was looking at, some that they're kind of thinking about it, and then some where they're more aware of it, and some where they're trying to do something about it. So the reality is, if they really want to, it was maybe 14% really felt like they were like truly high functioning with DE&I initiatives, throughout the whole organization. So I just kind of wanted to pull that up so I can kind of refer to it while I'm talking. So, you start out in the beginning, you're undeveloped. Then the beginning is you're trying to understand it, but you haven't made any efforts. Intermediate means you've done some initiatives and maybe a little training, but it's just not really, inclusive. And advanced is where you're kind of looking at DE&I, but it's strategic and you're kind of implementing that in multiple layers throughout the organization. And then an expert, it's not just that you're doing A, B, C, D, and E, but it's really woven into your culture, and it becomes it becomes something that your board members are. It's on their radar. It's on your executives levels. It's everybody from the tippy top to the very entry level employee, that everybody's understanding and grasping it and working towards those things. And so there's a lot of different things that an organization or an employer can do. So, first it's coming up with a policy, coming up with a plan, and then you want to train your employees on DE&I. You want to look at ways different metrics, and it can be on your hiring, your promotions. It can be things like making sure that you have goals set and you can looking at a set point of time each year to say, okay, this is our baseline. This is where we are now. Where do we want to be in X amount of time? And you don't have to set a quota, but you can just basically say, and kind of like the whole AAP thing. And again, AAPs are for government contractors. Not everybody does it, but the philosophy behind it is it's about trying to improve your outreach. And so instead of, it's not a quota system. It's not saying, oh, you have to have, an even number of people in this category compared to that category. That's really not what it is. It's about saying, okay, we only have 10 female Black engineers in our entire company, and looking at, and you can pull the stats for the Bureau of Labor Statistics has numbers on what the availability of that workforce of that particular skill set is in your community. So you can go out and you pull it up, and there's a lot of companies that can have software that can help you with this, but you can go, oh, well, we really should be at, we're at like 2%, we should be at 5%. So we're not saying you have to promote people or hire people just based on that, but hopefully subconsciously just having a focus on, we would really like this type of person in this position is a good part, but it's really about outreach. It's about, where do we find that type of person when we're recruiting them? Where do we find them to hire them? What kinds of magazines, periodicals, membership organizations, who should we be reaching out to make sure that they're aware that we have these opportunities so that they can apply, and then they're a part of that pool that we could possibly hire and or promote them. So that's kind of some of the basic, ways you want to look at just adding some little pieces of DE&I into your organization.
Wonderful. These are all awesome tips. I wrote down that Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then the chart you're looking at, is that a public chart?
It is from an organization called Circa, and so they sell DE&I services. But it's just basically a white paper called The Future of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion 2022. You want, I can give it if there's a link in this chat, or just send it to you afterwards, because this isn't live.
Send it into our chat and we'll post it.
Okay.
We'll put it in the description for this.
Yes.
All right. Hopefully they're okay with me talking about that. I'm sure they are.
More networking happening here.
Exactly.
So our quote this week is, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Confucius, which I think goes so perfectly into this topic today, because we are walking that 1,000 miles as women in leadership and business, and we take that next, taking that next right step over and over and over again. So anyway,
it goes right in with my words for the year, like heirloom legend, like what do we want to leave behind? And we are seeing what came before us, and we want it to be different going forward, right? We want it to be better for our daughters and granddaughters and our whole community better, because we're going to thrive better as a community if we're not worrying about these things, and it's just equal. Like when we figure out that habit of equality, inclusion was the better word, right?
diversity, inclusion, and equity. Yes.
When we figure
Yeah, it's usually called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but
okay.
They're all slightly different.
When we make it a habit and it isn't so hard to find the change, we're gonna next level what we're doing as a country, really. Like as human beings, we're gonna be on another level, right? When these aren't the things that we have to talk about, that we're still having to talk about.
and it's kind of like that book Lean In, and I know some people think it's controversial because she's basically just saying, hey, if you want something, go after it. And I feel like a lot of people felt like, she was kind of being too harsh on women that stayed at home. And I read the book and I really didn't get that sense, but it's by Sheryl Sandberg. But she's basically just saying, if you're kind of in that track, put in the hard work, put in the effort, but also make sure that your superiors know what you're doing and that you want the promotion, and just basically letting them know that you're there, and the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So, but basically just saying, don't just let a man take the position if you feel like you can take it. Lean in, work hard, do everything you can, and get that position, and know that you've earned it, and know that your counterparts, they're asking for the raise, they're asking for the promotion, they're asking for all those things, and that women need to make sure that we have that confidence that we are doing the same. And for whatever reason, on average, women we tend to be a little more like, okay, whatever, we don't always want to kind of push it. And so just, lean in, and if you're on that track and you want to keep going, don't let anything stop you, was kind of her message in that.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I personally don't feel like that's dogging on someone who really wants to be at home with their kids. Like, if that's really what you want, be honest with yourself. Like,
Mhm.
is this your passion? Like, I wanted nothing more to be a mom. Like, I wanted to be home with my kid, and it was really hard for me to leave him at home and go to work. But in that same instance, I wanted to thrive in the work environment. So I remember going to, and I was working with all females, but it was a small office. And I said to the director, I'm like, what do I need to do to move up here? And she's like, I need you to get a degree. So I went back to school. Even you can ask.
So you leaned in and you got it.
Yeah, like you got to ask the questions, right? Like, what do you need to do? Like, and that's how I ended up with an associate's of business. Like, you just keep working on the little things until you figure it out. And what I really liked about doing that process was I loved the way my brain grew. It wasn't so much about getting the associates. It was really about being and growing your brain in a different way. I think, like,
you got to prove to yourself that you were smart enough to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And since that's been an underlying issue for me, that was a great choice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it builds that confidence.
Yes.
So, and I know we've talked a little bit about workplaces having to be more flexible than they had been before COVID. Well, I mean, this is a perfect time or perfect place to kind of bring up that discussion, is because, if women if they still have young children, school age children generally, and we value family. Most people do value family. That's in our culture. So, but wanting them to work an 8 to 5 schedule may not work for that. And so, one of the things from that, the DE&I study that I was referring to was looking at, organizations that excelled at DE&I initiatives. They were more likely to offer part-time work for professionals. And so we've been so mindset that it has to be it's got to be a 580, it's got to be 40 hours a week. Or five, sorry, I'm thinking 980. That's a different schedule. But thinking that you have to get 40 hours of work in a work week, that has to be an 8-hour day. And there's nothing that says that, or nothing that says that that has to all be on site. And so if you can give some flexibility, you can find ways that your people can excel and you can grow them if it's not in the traditional 8 to 5 format. So I feel like that's a really important thing to look at.
Or even parents who have to be at work at 6 a.m. A lot of those job positions that start at 6 a.m., especially in like the construction industrial field, you cannot find a babysitter that early in the morning. My sister works in the construction industry and always has problems with childcare because nobody opens at 4 a.m.
Right.
In the time for her to drop
And they made
her
it
child
even
off,
harder.
get some gas, and get to work.
I don't know in other areas, but in this area, they've made it even harder to have like an in-home daycare, which is what was the go-to for those kind of positions, because an in-home daycare, there's always somebody there. So I can take your kid at 4:30 in the morning. I can just put them back to sleep and do my thing I got to do because I'm still, you're not in the facility as opposed to in-home daycare. And it's just really hard right now, especially.
And it's really, really hard to find even an in-home daycare that opens earlier than 6 a.m.
Yeah, you really have to get to know
Let's be honest.
Until you know,
Unless her name is Grandma, it's not happening, right?
Grandma doesn't want to get up that early either.
Absolutely. I think this was a wonderful, wonderful topic to talk about this week. I think it is so, so fitting. And it is just marvelous to have you in our back pocket as as one of our tools and as a guest at our table. Thank you so much, Samantha, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, audience, for joining us. And as always, you can go to our website, Women in Leadership, BSMB.com, and see what's going on. Our weekly episodes are always at the bottom of the front page. Whatever the most current episode automatically updates. It's like one of the coolest updates on the website. So
this quarter's cause of the quarter is the Boogie Bin. Entrepreneurs are leading the way in giving in the community, and the Boogie Bin is really special here in our local community. They have like barrels out in different places around the whole county, and what they do is they collect gently used pet items like leashes, collars, bags of food, canned goods, all sealed for the food guys. And they donate that to local shelters or
they pick a cause every month, so you can kind of find out like these are the items that are needed, and sometimes they're here, sometimes they're far. They always do something local, but in times of great need, they'll find somebody that's in need elsewhere in the world, and we can all donate through them. So it's a really cool organization, and they are sponsored and requested by the Dogs of Podcast.
Right. So go check them out. All their links will be in our description. And in closing, thank you, listeners, for joining us today. It's a blessed part of our lives to be on this journey with you together.